call. So if they don't remember the gender of the police officers, they're most definitely not going to remember there's loads of support services you can ring, here's the family law court address that you can go and get an order, you know, I'm going to call back up to you and we'll talk, or would you like to come down at 12 o'clock tomorrow and make a statement? Boom, gone, because they're at a crisis point. They have rang 999 or called the guards because they're at a crisis point. Considering victims endure a minimum of 30 incidents of domestic abuse prior to a police service even being notified. So this isn't the one that, well, I'm going to show them, you know, I'm going to ring them on the first one. No, this is number 35 minimum that is so bad, my usual coping strategies aren't able to protect me. I believe that all Garda engagement could lead to murder prevention, and I know that's, when I give this to my colleagues, they think I'm a little bit idealistic in this, but we can support, we can protect, and we can prevent. If we communicate to a victim that we have an acute understanding of the nuances and the complexities of domestic abuse. The Domestic Violence Act, The Domestic Violence Act 2018 came into law on the 1st of January 2019, and if I have any grey hairs in my head, it's because of this act. If you think about it, like, I actually don't know who picked it, like the 1st of January 2019, I need to have information, a translation of the act out, because literally the reality is, at 2 minutes past midnight, on the 1st of January 2019, some guard, somewhere in the country is going to be responding to a domestic abuse call and have to rely on this new legislation. So it completely repeals the previous Domestic Violence Act of 1996, and it did simplify a lot of things. Like previously with orders, you had to prove that you were residing with your partner 9 out of 12 months. Nonsense. You couldn't get an order if you were in an intimate relationship but weren't residing together. So with these orders, that's what it did. It got rid of that whole having to prove period of residency. So if you're a spouse, an ex-spouse, a civil partner, ex-partner, share a child, be a parent of an adult dependent, so a parent can get one against the child but not the other way around. Did I say have a child together? And if you're in an intimate relationship, and intimate does not have to be sexual. And intimate, we have had, we've supported young people under the age of 18 getting an order against their intimate partner. So boyfriend or girlfriend, doesn't matter. So that's what was brought in by the orders. So if you look at it, so protection order, interim barring order, and emergency barring orders. If you consider them, they're kind of your interim orders. So depending on the direction of the court, they will decide on a safety order or a barring order. So your safety orders for 3 years and your barring orders for 5 years, unless it's a different date specified by the courts. So you get them in the family law court. So in Dublin we have Dolphin House that sits Monday to Friday, which is great, but down the country you could have the first Monday of the month or the second Thursday of the third week. So to allow for that, they introduced the special sitting in the district court. So an applicant, as in someone looking for an order, can make a request of a member of an Garda Síochána, not below the rank of sergeant, to contact the court service and get a special sitting of the district court to get an interim, emergency or protection order. So it means then you don't have to have people down the country, you know, saying, well shit, I have to wait 2 and 3 weeks before I'm able to go in and get an order. The other thing with the Act is they brought in 3 new offences. So prohibition on publication or broadcast, and unfortunately the difficulty with that is it only applies to a breach of orders. So if you're from the country, Donegal Democrat, you'll have a lovely little row down here in the local newspaper and it'll be like court news. And you'll be able to see that Laura Sweeney was up in court there because for a breach of an order. That's gone. You cannot identify the victim or the offender, the applicant or dependent or respondent, or any children. But unfortunately, it's only for a breach of orders. So if I'm in court as an offender for assaulting my partner, that can be disclosed. So that is most definitely a gap in the legislation, apart from not actually having an offence of domestic abuse in the Act is a gap. Forced marriage, This actually, we haven't come across this very much, and we haven't come across it since, but it was championed by an NGO and it was included. The third thing actually, which I didn't put on the slide, is this act actually made it illegal for anyone under 18 years of age to marry. I know why you would want to get married under 18 years, but previous to this, anyone under 18 could go to the court with the consent of their parents and be allowed to marry once they get a certificate. That is completely gone now, thankfully. And coercive control, I'm going to talk about, and this is a huge thing. Anyone who's dealt with in the field of domestic abuse, coercive control has always been there. Just now it's an offence. And the final bit is where the judiciary are forced, and I say forced in inverted commas, to acknowledge that the relationship between an offender and a victim is an aggravating factor. So to force the judiciary to acknowledge that me being a victim and my partner being the offender places me at greater risk than if it was a stranger who I didn't know as the offender. So, coercive control. So basically, Section 39 states that a person is guilty of offence if they knowingly or persistently engage in behaviour that is controlling or coercive and would have a serious effect on a person. And the serious effect is the threat of violence or an impact on their day-to-day activities. And it only applies to current or ex partners. We would actually have liked if this applied to elder abuse, which is a huge issue in Ireland at the moment, but it only applies to intimate relationships. Coercive control, the only way I'll describe it is, everyone thinks, oh, domestic abuse is up here, and coercive control fits here beside the psychological, the emotional, the physical. No. Coercive control is the foundation upon which all other abuse is built. It is the toolkit that an abuser uses to basically inflict all the other forms of abuse. And the reality is, an abuser could be so proficient in coercive control that they would never have to engage in any other forms of abuse because they already get maximum control over their victim. And coercive control is a liberty offence. It literally is about reducing the space within a victim can move, and it is a behaviour offence. So there's been a lot of talk about why are our figures very low compared to Scotland. Scotland very cleverly made it a physical and behaviour offence. That's why their figures are massive compared to ours. This is a behaviour offence. And so with that is challenges on how to identify it, gather evidence for it, and prosecute it. This is just some of the examples, threats and intimidation, deprivation of basic needs. So we have a case where offender goes to work, throws the keys of the front door and the bathroom into the boot, drives to work so that his partner and their 2 children have to use the back garden to defecate. Yeah. So when I'm talking about daily needs, I'm actually talking about being allowed to pick up a bottle of water and drink from it when you want, to go to the toilet unwatched and unsupervised, to use a specific amount of sheets of toilet roll, because that is exactly what you're allowed. That's domestic abuse in Ireland. Criminal damage, stalking, harassment, as I said. Apparently with an iPhone, 3 swipes, you can put a spyware onto an iPhone, which is incredibly disconcerting. I think with an Android phone it's a little bit harder. But literally every single case we see, it is literally like the domestic abuser have shared a manual on how to inflict just maximum control over a victim. They literally all follow kind of the same path. Spyware, tracking devices, monitoring on phones, have to answer your call after a certain time, sexual abuse, physical, like literally it just follows everything. Isolate you from your family and friends, or the opposite is be so wonderful and charming that your family and friends wouldn't even believe you if you said that whatever was going on at home. Literally, I actually think there's a manual going around and they're just literally sharing it. This was a picture disclosed by colleagues of ours in London Metropolitan Police, Inspector Jack Rowlands. He said that his police officers responded to a domestic abuse call, first time ever responding to this house, and this is what they met with. Now, do you think that you would have to engage in any other form of abuse to get maximum control over your victim if that's what they had to walk up and down every day? Would you? No. Literally that was placed because he found domestic abuse leaflets in her handbag. And that's what he did. There was no previous incidents of physical assault within that relationship prior to that night. The coercive control has a power of arrest, but if you think about it, if we have a power of arrest for coercive control, we're looking to detain someone immediately. So we need to have our ducks in a row. So unfortunately, some people think that when they make a report of coercive control break, their partner or interfamilial relation is going to be lifted straight away. No, we have to get our ducks in a row, we have to try to gather evidence. So during the course of a detention, we have to be in a position to put all our evidence to an offender and allow them an opportunity for a retort or to contest what we have in front of them. Sorry now. This is literally everything we had to do to get ready for the new act. If you think about it, we've what, 15,000 police officers. There's no way I was going to be able to get around them. So we have it's like our Google, it's a portal, and literally throw up absolutely every document and make it as short and concise as possible. Because guards are just like everyone else. They do not have the time nor the mental span to be reading 20 pages of a document at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the portal's great. If someone's coming in to report something, you can literally put in the guidance document onto the act and say, oh, hang on a second, this guy is coming to say that he wants to get an order because he's having a row with his neighbour. He's not actually eligible to have to get an order. That's me there. That's actually my work email, so I just thought I'd stick that up just in case if anyone ever wants to touch base with me. Things are a little bit busy at the moment. We're redoing our policy. We're developing a risk assessment tool just to try to gather as much information and to ensure that we're channeling limited resources in the correct manner towards high-risk cases. And then training program. 18 years in uniform, I know how lacking we were in training, and that's a huge piece for me. So we give training down at Garda College, around the country, we do seminars, etc. And then also linking in with universities like yourselves. I'm going to pause there and just allow for any questions. And you can ask me anything. Literally, think of it, ask it. If I don't know it, I'll tell you. But I'm not precious in what I can tell you. Nothing. A guard in front of you. I knew I should have worn a uniform. Completely different. Not like anything. Ask anything. Jesus. One question.
Did you ever come across an incident where the actual perpetrator told you that they were the victim? That, you know what I mean, and actually blamed the victim, they were the one, get the guards on site to try and...
When you walk into, I literally, when I think of just the amount of calls where you walk into a domestic, someone is unable to articulate just what's going on and why they rang, and then you have the other part of me who is calm, charming, rational, and gives, even in the face of their partner having a physical injury, a very logical explanation for what happened and why they inflicted this physical injury to their partner. And they're literally, such is their arrogance and their inner belief system, that they believe that the guard will actually go, oh yeah, no, I completely get that, yeah. Literally, oh jeez, yeah, sure God, you'd hit her yourself, if you live. But, and that is, there's been domestic homicide offenders who've been interviewed, and their first words are, I shouldn't be here. If anyone had any idea what I delivered, you would have done what I've done. Imagine, in the face of being convicted for murdering their partner, they have still had that attitude. So yeah. And it's literally our natural disposition, like anyone, is to speak to the one who's logical and rational, given a narrative that you converse with. We are literally telling members, we have to put that as, one side and try to unravel what the person who isn't communicating clearly, and rationally and try to ascertain what went on. Anyone else?
Sorry,
Yeah.
you
Last
mentioned that,
question.
Yeah.
you mentioned that most perpetrators get to suspend sentences.
Yeah.
There is another way to separate the victim from the perpetrator locally.
Pardon? So is there any other way to separate
Yeah.
oh, without going through the criminal courts?
Sorry?
Without going through the criminal court system?
No, like, either way, or going to the criminal court.
You see, the problem is that domestic and intimate partner violence is seen as your minor offences. It is viewed by certain sectors in society because they don't have an understanding of it, as in, oh, it's just a family row, it's a domestic matter, you know, go and work on your marriage, you know, sort of like, and that's why the suspended sentence are being given. And that's wrong, like, you
Yeah, I
know,
understand that.
yeah.
But there is like somehow enforce you not to keep distance from the victim.
No, no. They're all the orders should, loads of offenders have an order against them and they still breach it. They still, you know, they believe, doesn't matter what the courts tell me, I will follow on the path I want to go, which is impacting on the victim.
See, thanks very much, first of all, to Laura. Absolutely. Every time I hear you, Laura, I learn more and more and more and more. And I thought I knew a lot, and I keep learning more and more and more. So thank you so much. I'm absolutely certain students in this room have learned an awful lot for today, for your course, for life. I hope you have. So thanks ever so much. But I think in relation to that, I think Laura's point is the point that these suspended sentences are just nonsense, because until some of these domestic abuse offenders realise that they're not above the law, that they actually, the law, Laura's team and the court will actually punish them and discipline them, like the likes of the person living with them, or, you know, the neighbour. It's very, very hard. So I think we absolutely need the law, as well as all the multi-agencies and so on. So thanks ever so much for all that. Can I just take a minute now, just to turn attention to say to you about exams. Just two quick things. You have section A. International students can email me from today to tell me that they want to do essays instead of exams. That doesn't apply to Irish students. That's because generally international students are trying to get home, or their first language is not English, so whatever. In part B of the paper, I will not be putting this up on Blackboard, or on Brightspace, but I will just put a couple of headings for students who are sick or can't be here today or whatever. There are two questions on coercive control, basically, and you can do one of those, or there's one question on sexual violence. So the ones on coercive control, one is about the impact on families and children in situations of coercive control, drawing on relative literature and all that, and talk about best practice in such situations. And that is partly Laura's work, a criminal justice response or law enforcement response. It's Dave's work the other day, and it's anything else you think about and find. So you need to think about that question. So it's impact on children and families, and best practice, good responses. The second one is to analyse the motivations and strategies of domestic abuse perpetrators, and including the perpetrators of coercive control, and draw on relevant research and literature. And that again is all the stuff that's on Laura's Garda website, but it's also Don Hennessy's work. Remember I talked to you how he gets into her head, and Don has another book out. It's Don's work, and I wouldn't attempt a question without thinking about that. And the third question is basically the impact of sexual violence and abuse on adults and children, and think about relevant research and literature to consider legal, social and psychological complexities in responding to them. Legal, social and psychological complexities. Legal, social and psychological complexities. So it's the Kavanaghs, the Kavanagh women, the three sisters were abused by their father. So it's the Kavanaghs, and again, stuff that's on the Garda website, etc., etc. I might put something up myself about that. So look, I just want to thank you first of all for taking the module. thank the women in the room for, showing up and listening to all these things over the course of the last 12 weeks. Thanks to the men in the room who've been brave enough to listen, because unfortunately we know that in a lot of this domestic sexual and child abuse there is a gender problem, and I mean that is just reality. So really thank you for taking the news. We're all brave to show up. I hope as well as learning a lot you've kind of realised that there is some hope in this, and that as Laura was saying, people don't recover and many don't. That's an alert to remind us that domestic abuse continues for 20 years on. For people, the resilience of souls that we all meet and deal with, I hope came through in some of the lectures, particularly in campus and otherwise. Feedback is available on the modern feedback thing. I do appreciate students give feedback because it is very helpful for guiding on next week. So I just want to finish by saying an enormous thanks to Laura Sweeney. Honestly, her work is phenomenal. And for years and years and years, as Laura said, the Garda response was like poor relation with Netflix and whatever. And then comes along Laura Sweeney and Declan Daly and a team in domestic protection units there in Hertfordshire trying to teach the rest of the guards all around the country how to respond. So it can only get better. But the guards, please keep speaking about the guards and the great work they do, wherever you do, in relation to this area, and keep advocating for more support for the guards to do what they do, because we can't do it. We can't go in because we haven't trained, we don't understand it, but the guards can, and we need to support them. But it is multi-agency. So thanks ever so much, Laura, really, again, on behalf of all the students. So thank you.
Thank you.